I worked night audit at this semi-swanky hotel next to the airport. One night, I get a call from a lady in 204. She says there was arguing, loud banging and crying coming out of 206. I check the computer. No one is checked into that room due to maintenance issues. I called my supervisor to see what to do. She tells me to call on-site security and follow them up with a key. I decide to be the bigger man and go up anyways. As we get off the elevator, we can hear the crying. It's loud. My heart starts racing as we near the door, so I hand the key to the security guard. The next 5 minutes seem to happen in slow motion. He opens the door and immediately flicks on the light. Keep in mind, 206 is on the second floor, and the only door in was by me. This was at like 3 AM, and there was no one around. As we enter the room, the shower is on. The steam is coming from under the door. There's only one lamp on in the room. It's super cold. There's a lady in a red lacy bra and black panties with super red hair curled up crying in the bed. She was facing away from us. As Frank approached her, he asked if everything was okay. She sort of stopped crying and rolled over. When she did, a wave of horror came over me. She was super pale, covered in blood. She was just staring behind us. That's when we realized the shower had stopped and the door was open. There was a man about 6'5" standing in the doorway. As we turned around, cops tased him and arrested him. Turns out he was a rapist who hides in hotel rooms, kidnaps women who stay there and cuts them open. To this day, I will never go to that hotel again. This was in January of 2016. I'd gone up to the shopping center that's about a 30-minute walk from my house. While I would usually take the bus home from the shopping center near my house, the bus wasn't due for another 45 minutes by the time I had done what I needed to, and my 10-year-old brother was at home alone. My mom has no problem with me leaving my brother home alone for an hour or two, because he can take care of himself for that long. So I decided to walk back to my house instead of waiting basically an hour for the bus. On the way home, I saw a man, maybe 40 to 45 years old, walking in the opposite direction to me. As he turned the corner to walk towards me, I got the impression that he didn't look right. Probably because as he was walking, he was just staring at me. As he walked past me, I got a sinking feeling, like when you're on a plane and it starts to descend. As I continued to walk, I felt like someone was following me. So when I got to the bus stop, I made it look like I was checking the bus times, which gave me an excuse to turn around. And once I did, my heart started racing. This fucker had changed direction and turned 180 degrees to walk in the same direction as me. He was walking faster than he was before, and this freaked me out. I was close to the road that I would usually turn up to get to my street. I turned up the street and had walked about 25 meters up it when I heard crunching of a chip packet that I knew I had passed. He was still behind me. I decided I'd cross the road to put more distance between us and to also get to the street that was across from me. From here, I could go a longer way home. This longer way home had a lot of corners, making following me a lot harder to do. And this street also had a lot of teenagers who were at home, due to it being summer holidays. So if the guy tried anything, there were a lot of people who would likely hear me screaming. So I was going along the long route when I turned to look behind me, and he was still there. This is where I started my plan to get back to my house. I turned the next corner and sprinted along the path as quietly as I could. I was on my house's street. If I was going straight home, I would have gone left, but I went straight ahead towards a smallish park that was just up the street from my house. The reason I did this was because I could go up through the park and around to get to my house. As I was crossing the road to get to the park, I looked back. I saw him jogging up the path I'd just come from. He saw me and started sprinting towards me. Luckily, I had a 150-meter head start. I ran through the park, up and around to the left. The area behind the park is like a maze, so this gave me an advantage. Once I was behind the park and out of his sight, I continued sprinting for a house that had an old shed in its front yard. The shed was empty, and the door was open as always. So I hid in there, able to look out through a mirrored window, and he was looking around for me. He then walked the way that I was planning on going to get to my house. I was still too scared to leave the shed, so I waited for about 10 minutes before I saw him walking back towards the park on his phone. And I heard part of what he was saying to the other end.
"Yeah, I lost her, but I think she lives around here. She's a crafty bitch though."
After he passed, I waited another 10 minutes before leaving the shed and sprinting towards my house. I called my mom, who called the police, who in turn called me. I gave a description of the man and refused to leave the house alone for a week. I've never seen him again, and the police report hasn't come up with anything.
Stranger Stories. This encounter happened when I was about 10 years old. It was in the middle of summer and my sister and I were home alone. Both our mom and grandmother were busy, so they could not stay home with us. We were used to being home alone during the summer, so it was not a big deal. During this day, I had gotten up and started to play The Sims 2 in our kitchen. My sister was watching TV in our den. A few hours into gaming, I thought I heard the doorbell ring. At first, I thought it was my game, but my sound was off. I asked my sister if she heard the doorbell, to which she replied she hadn't. I brushed it off and went back to playing my game. About 10 minutes later, I see a reflection on my computer of a man in a suit. His hands cupped around his eyes, looking through the glass door behind me. I turn around to be face to face with this strange man I had never seen before. I had no idea how long he had been watching me. He gives me the biggest, creepiest smile I had ever seen, and waves at me like he knew me from somewhere. I screamed, calling my sister, who hadn't noticed the man yet. Scared and partially frozen in fear, my sister grabs the house phone quickly, calling our grandmother. This guy was wearing a full-on black suit that did not fit him. If not strange enough that this guy was wearing a full suit while it's 99 degrees out there, he was also carrying a weird-looking briefcase. All the salespeople I'd seen only ever had a clipboard or maybe a couple flyers, but this man had something else. The guy proceeds to walk around our house to the back door. During his little trip, he must have seen there wasn't a car in the driveway, indicating no one was home. As I was getting up to hide, the man reached down, grabbed the doorknob, and started to jiggle it forcefully. Thankfully, the door was locked. He looked at me smiling, gestured at me to come unlock the door for him. All the noise he had been making had set off our 75-pound dog. No way she was going to let the guy get to us if he did get in. My sister tells me our grandmother is on her way, and she wants us to hide in the back of the house in her room until she could get home. My sister hands me the phone, then runs into the kitchen to grab the biggest knife we have. I can hear her yelling at the guy that we called the cops. She comes back into the room with me and we shut the door. She tells me that after she lied to the guy about calling the cops, he started laughing uncontrollably, extremely loud. A little while later, we hear the door open and my grandmother calling us. She tells us she did not see any man anywhere in sight. She had walked around the whole house before unlocking the door. She also thought it was weird that if he was a salesperson, he would have left a note saying, "Sorry, we missed you." She ended up taking the rest of the day off to stay with us. It's been 11 years since this encounter, and I still don't want to know what his intentions were, or what was in his mysterious briefcase.
It was a cold night in late January. I had just gotten off work at around 9 p.m. and was driving back to my apartment on the other side of town. As I arrived, I scanned my card in the booth in front of the underground parking door and drove inside to my reserved spot. The upside of having a reserved parking spot was that obviously no one would take it. The disadvantage of having this particular spot was that the elevator happened to be all the way on the other side of the lot. So I parked my car, got out, locked it, and began my journey to the other side of the garage. At night, the building turns half of the lights off down there, so it was really dark. The few lights that are on are also really dim. The whole place was a ghost town, there was no one around. It was honestly kind of eerie and quiet, other than the faint hum of the lights. As I was walking, I started hearing this sound. It sounded like a faint tapping sound, but on like something hollow, like tapping on glass. I kept walking and tried to ignore it, but it seemed the more I walked, the louder it got. At one point I stopped and started darting my eyes around looking for the source, and I found it. I could see 10 yards away, at one of the parked cars, there was a finger on the other side of the car, reaching up and tapping the glass of the window. This one really stiff, pale index finger. No other body parts I could see other than the finger. I tried to look underneath the car to see who was there, but another car parked next to it was blocking my view. I moved to the next row over to avoid walking past whoever that was and just kept walking. But not even 30 seconds later, I started hearing the tapping again. What the hell? I thought. I started looking again, and this time it was a parked car to my right, another finger on the other side of it tapping the glass. This car I could see under, and sure enough, I could make out someone kneeling down behind the car. I'm not the confrontational type at all, so my solution was to once again avoid it by moving 2 rows over this time to get away from these people and just start walking faster to the other side of the garage. I figured I would start running if I needed to. As I was walking, I was hearing these sounds from behind me, like scraping and shuffling sounds. I started walking faster. Then I felt my heart drop as I heard the glass tapping sound again. I did a 360 to see where it was coming from, and I saw another car to my right with a finger tapping on the glass behind it. Then the tapping got twice as loud, and I realized it was because 2 other cars to my left also had people tapping their fingers on the glass behind them. I was getting fed up with whatever kind of stupid prank this was. I ran towards the nearest car with someone behind it, shouting like a madman with my fists out. By the time I made it to the car, however, there was no one there. But there was something left behind, something that made me feel sick to my stomach, and unable to even move for a second other than just stare at it. Lying on the ground behind the car was a severed human index finger. The same one that had been tapping on the glass. I heard the tapping sound again, this time from behind me, and I spun around to see another finger tapping on the glass of a car that was 3 cars away. That's when I decided to start running. I sprinted all the way to the other side of the garage, then turned to the right and ran until I got to the elevator. I sat there smashing the button frantically. I could sense presences moving behind me and people watching me. As soon as the elevator door slid open, I squeezed in and smashed the button for my floor. Right as the elevator doors closed, I saw another severed finger thrown forcefully at the door. I heard it land with a thump as the doors closed, and then the elevator started moving up. I made it to my apartment, locked the door, and collapsed on the couch to gather my thoughts. A few minutes later, I picked up the phone and called the building security and explained the situation to one guy. I wasn't sure if he was taking me seriously or not, but he said him and a couple guys would check it out. About an hour later, as I was watching TV getting ready for bed, he called me back and said no one was in the underground parking unit, and they didn't find any severed fingers. I thanked him and went to bed. By far the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. This was 3 years ago now, and I no longer live in that complex. I moved out as soon as I went to college a few months after the incident, which I had planned to do anyway. I was browsing Facebook Marketplace looking for new snowboarding boots. My $200 pair had just been stolen a week prior as I had carelessly left them unattended at the resort. I wasn't looking to drop another $200 or even $100 on a new pair, nor did I have the money to do so. I spent most of the day checking the listings and refreshing the page until a listing that was just posted caught my eye. It It was for a brand new barely used pair of Burton snowboard boots in my size for only $75.